Welcome to Sustainability Forward. Carmine, we have a top story of the week, and that is a story published by the global energy think tank Ember. And it basically says that the renewables have officially overtaken coal as the world's leading source of electricity for the first time in history. So, in the first part of 2025, officially renewables have produced more power than coal, and that's a huge news.
Yes, so Rishi, good news. We see a strong rise in solar and a little bit lesser in wind, and this brings renewables overtaking coal generation for the first time on record in the first half in 2025. So we have a share now as a result of renewables around 34%, while coal is around 33%.
Wow. Now, what's interesting is that this headline doesn't tell the full story. So Ember basically says that the global picture, if we look at country by country or region by region, is actually quite mixed. And it is the developing countries, particularly China, which have led the clean energy charge, while the wealthier countries like the US or the countries in the European Union, they actually increase their reliance on fossil fuels.
And there is much beyond that, because it's about geopolitics, it's about energy security. Actually, Rishi, probably we should do an episode around exactly what's happening in some countries, China, but also in India or in Pakistan, for example, this year. And we'll talk a lot about China in this episode.
Absolutely.
Now, let's go back. The link to this, when we look at the International Energy Agency and its report, we see that the gap between these regions is likely to widen. China added more solar and wind capacity than the rest of the world combined. And while the International Energy Agency has now halved its forecast for US renewable from that growth from this decade, this went from 500 gigawatts to around 250.
Yeah. And so this is basically showing us two different futures, right? Or two energy futures. One that is led by rapid clean tech expansion in Asia, and the other by renewed fossil fuel investments in the West, which is quite a stark comparison, really.
And probably you hear this kind of concept around more and more, the concept of an electrostate versus a petrostate. And we can talk about this actually when we're looking at the country lenses episode. Now, this contrast raises a big question. What does it mean for the global energy balance going forward?
And that is exactly what we are going to unpack in today's episode, because what we are going to do is we're going to deep dive into BP's energy outlook 2025 and explore what these shifts say about who's really leading the energy transition. And remember, last year we did the 2024 outlook analysis as well, but this time the outlook has just been published. So we thought, instead of drowning you, our audience, in numbers and many charts, what we have done for you is we pulled out the top 10 insights that we think actually matter.
Good. So we will start with the two scenario. This is what BP changed this year. And then hit the headlines. So the oil long glide path, the LNG decade, the AI power hunger, why efficiency is the quiet boss, and why emerging economies decide whether to go well below 2 degrees.
Yeah. So just to frame it up, there are two scenarios. First up is current trajectory, which we will refer to as CT in this discussion. And think of this scenario, think of this scenario as the business as usual. We just keep muddling through. Policies more or less stay the same. There are incremental improvements, but no giant U-turns in behavior.
So tech keeps advancing. As you said, no big policy step change. Emissions peak mid-decade and then decline slowly, too slowly to hit climate goals. Is realistic about friction, permitting supply chain consumer inertia.
The second scenario is called below 2 degrees. So it's quite apparent from the name what it means. We will refer to it as BP does as B2 as the second scenario. That is designed to be broadly consistent with keeping global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius by focusing on cumulative emissions to 2050.
Important nuances here. This below 2 degrees of B2 is not global net zero by 2050. It's roughly a 90% cut in net emission versus 2023 by 2050, leaving a small residual to mop up later with deep tech, policy, or removals.
Yeah. So both scenarios, same model, same starting date, different assumptions about policy ambition, and different assumptions about efficiency and the speed of clean energy build out. BP also lets you layer a few different sensitivities, geopolitics, weak efficiency, delays on top of either scenario to stress test the outcomes.
So the current trajectory, the CT scenario shows where we are headed if nothing major changes. The below 2 degrees show what it takes if a lot changes fast, especially in power and in industry, and especially in emerging economies.
So, let's go into the insights that we think matter out of this assessment. Insight number one is the framing itself, right? Last year, we had current trajectory versus net zero. This year, it is CT versus B2.
And that's helpful. It grounds the faster transition case in temporal outcomes instead of hard net zero by 2050 deadline. This also makes it easier to compare with IPCC ranges.
Yeah, so the bottom line is you are not debating the vibes, you are debating how fast policy and markets can actually bend emissions.
The second insight is the map of the impact. So by 2050, about 4/5, 80% of the extra emissions reduction that separate the below 2 degree scenario from the current trajectory scenario come from emerging economies.
Yeah, and then if we take the sector lens, it's power that does most of the work. Roughly 2/5 of the gap between CT and B2 is just cleaning up electricity itself. The rest is mostly coming from industry.
So, in simple terms, if you want the world to hit the below 2 degrees, the winning move is simple but hard. Build clean power faster where demand is booming, and decarbonize heat and processes emissions in the heavy industry.
Right. Now, insight three is all about oil because we cannot avoid talking about oil in this kind of an outlook. So let's talk about oil.
So in the current trajectory, the global oil demand glides down to a little under the mid 80s million barrel per day by 2050. In the below 2 degrees scenario, it falls to the mid 30s million barrel a day by 2050.
And why does this happen? That's because EVs and efficiency steadily erode road transportation demand, while petrochemicals become the last big pocket of oil use.
And again, the regional dynamic. China, which drove so much growth, plateaus on oil in the late 2020s. The growth pattern shift from cars to petchem feedstocks.
Fourth insight is about the timing of peak oil. Last year, peak oil, I think, was expected to be around 2025, right? If we follow on from what has been said, BP's view of peak now has been pushed out a bit later. So the peak now has been nudged later versus last year.
Yeah, rather than peaking squarely around 2025, BP now sees growth hanging on closer to 2030, so moving to the right. even as both scenarios show declines later. The glide is still down, the crest just sits a little further off.
Now, since we've talked about oil, we cannot avoid talking about gas and LNG. So gas is next now, and the key word is LNG.
Yes, so in the current trajectory, global LNG export surge roughly 50 to 60% by 2035, compared with the mid 2020s. The US and Middle East provide the majority of that increase. In the US, LNG becomes the largest slice of gas production through the 2030s.
And after 2035, the lines diverge. So remember, we are saying gas peaks in 2035, but in the two scenarios, the lines start diverging. In B2, below 2 degrees, as power and industry start to decarbonize faster, global gas and LNG trend down later in the period. In the current trajectory, they stay higher for much longer.
So near-term LNG looks robust. Post-2035 depends on how hard policy bites.
Exactly. Insight number 6 is what can be called the buzzwords of today, AI and data center related. The AI question everyone is asking is this power demand for real?
You're right, it's so much one of the most raised questions nowadays. The BP puts the numbers on it. In the current trajectory, data centers drive roughly a tenth, 10% of global power demand growth by 2035. But about 40% of the growth in the US. Also, the US currently accounts for around half of the global data centers' power demand.
And crucially, BP says the economy-wide effect of AI, if it indeed boosts productivity, could raise overall energy demand more than just the server room load.
Bottom line for planners, so treat AI as both a demand driver and an efficiency wildcard. Build grids plus flexibility like demand with surprise to the upside.
Insight number 7 is about efficiency. BP's take on it is that energy efficiency has in general underperformed. Efficiency is the quiet boss of this outlook. And again, the conclusion is that it has lately it has underdelivered.
So since 2019, global energy efficiency improvement have been closer to 1.5% per year, not the 2% that many plans assume. The shortfall kept fossil demand more resilient even as wind and solar scaled.
Yeah, so the homework is quite clear. Scale efficiency in buildings, motors, process heat, fleets, or the current trajectory will stick and B2 becomes less and less achievable.
So let's go to the next insight, number 8. We're still living through the shift from energy addition, so adding renewables on top of rising demand, as you mentioned at the beginning to the episode, to energy substitution, where clean power pushes out fossil generation.
Yeah, and in B2, that substitution starts to accelerate. Power emissions collapse towards near zero by 2050, even as electricity demand nearly doubles, right? So huge increase in energy demand from power, but the emissions is dropping really fast. In current trajectory, power gets cleaner too. So power is not all dirty in CT. It's just not fast enough to pull the whole system down in terms of emissions.
Which is why grids, storage, and permitting are now as important as turbines and panels.
Correct. Insight number 9 is about geography. This is where we tell the regional story. Regional speed round, Carmine. US first. Tell us what's going on in the US.
So, US. data center load and industrial electrification lift demand. Gas stabilizes the system in the current trajectory. LNG grows through the mid-2030s. Europe, the energy security lenses, renewable plus grid plus flexibility to cut important fuel risk. In China, as we said before, oil plateaus, coal power declines, renewables sprint. In India and emerging Asia, coal supports near-term expansion, but renewable-led electrification is the long game.
So the summary of the regional speed round that Carmine just did is that outcome of the next 25 or so years essentially hinges on emerging economies where demand is growing the fastest.
And let's go to the last insight, number 10. And here is about low carbon, hydrogen, and CCUS. We talk about this a lot about this technology in previous episode. These two play a bigger role in the below two scenario, especially for industry and bits of power. Most of the heavy lifting arrives later in the period.
Therefore, the message is quite pragmatic. They are essential for deep decarbonization, but deployment of hydrogen and CCUS depend on policy, on infrastructure, and offtake. Plan for sequencing. Clean power first, then hydrogen and carbon capture unlock the hard-to-abate sectors. So there you go. We have now taken you through the top 10 insights that we think were important. Now, Carmine, in the next maybe 1 or 2 minutes, let's do kind of the top 3 takeaways. What's the number 1 takeaway for you?
So one, aim at the hinge. If you decarbonize, your decarb plan isn't centered on emerging market power and industrial emissions, you're not moving the global curve.
Number 2, build for surprise on demand. Assume that AI pushes loads up and efficiency might disappoint. Prioritize grid capacity, interconnections, and flexibility of resources.
So the 3, we saw the importance of LNG. The next decade looks constructive in the current trajectory. 2035 depends on how fast the world leans towards the below 2 degrees.
And that's it. Those were the 10 insight tour of BP's Energy Outlook 2025 as we saw it. We have included some details which will give you a flavor of the important summary of the energy outlook of this year. When we publish the episode, we're going to include some more detailed numbers as well. As always, Carmine, it was a great discussion. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Rishi, and looking forward to the next episode.
Absolutely. So for our audiences around the world, as you know, we are on all major podcast platforms, and episodes will regularly go out on LinkedIn, where we are under the banner Sustainability Forward.
And
also
on our new great website, Rishi.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Carmine.
Sustainabilityforward.com.
Thank you. www.sustainabilityforward.com. See you next time on Sustainability Forward. Thank you.
Thank you.